Hi guys, this is about how to boot a USB drive from the Oracle VirtualBox virtual machine. So first of all you need to download the Oracle VirtualBox, and you can do it from this link, virtualbox.org. Click on the download section and then download your Windows version. There's just one version for both. So download that and install it. And now you need to go to reboot.pro, click on the downloads area, find the boot tools area, and then download David B's virtual machine USB boot utility, which we also need to download and install. So once we've got our downloads done and installed, you should have these two icons on the desktop. And we need to run Oracle Virtual Manager, and if you just launch this, you'll get a few messages on startup, and we need to make a new virtual machine. So just choose new, type in a name for whatever your virtual machine is going to be called. And it's obviously going to boot from a USB drive eventually, so you can put something to do with booting from USB in it. And we can make a virtual machine for Microsoft Windows, say for Windows 7 as one example. And that will set up the different bits of hardware in the VM specifically for Windows 7. So just increase the memory to get a decent amount of memory in there. You don't want to create a new virtual hard drive, so just click on create, and a virtual disk image will do fine. So just choose next, and dynamic allocated, so that it's not too big to start off with. 25 gigs should be plenty. Now we made that, we need to just alter the storage hard disk drives that we've got set up. The reason for this is that the David B's virtual machine utility needs to have an empty slot. So what we need to do is delete any controllers we don't want. So in this case it's going to be a SATA only virtual machine. So we need to delete the CD from it, and we have to leave an empty space for the first hard disk, because that's where the USB drive is going to be inserted by David B's virtual machine utility. So set that to SATA port 1, but of course we need to make sure that there are at least 2 SATA ports in the virtual machine. So see there it says port count 2, and that's on SATA port 1. So SATA port 0 is free now, and we should be able to add our USB drive into that. I'll show you how to do that later. So just check the other system settings now. Take out the floppy and the CD, because we don't want it to boot from that. We want it to boot from the hard disk, but the hard disk will actually be the USB drive when we put it into that first slot. And hardware virtualization is much faster if you enable virtualization. So just enable that on your virtual machine. I'll just quickly do another example here. This is how to set up a virtual machine with an IDE interface. So again, we just use new, type in a name, and I'll just call it IDE because this one's going to be an IDE hard disk interface, and maybe we'll just set it up for Linux and leave it as Ubuntu. Whack up the memory a bit. We'll create another virtual hard disk for this separate one. So again, just click next, and we can have the name for the VDI file, and again change the storage settings. So we don't want SATA in this case, so notice what the VDI is called, and just delete that entry and delete the SATA controller. We've now got an empty CD drive there, so we don't want that, we'll delete that. Now we need to add in our VDI file, existing disk file, so just select that in there. And it's been added in as the primary master, but that's the first slot. We don't want it in the first slot, we want it in the second slot, so change that to primary slave, and that leaves room for the USB drive to go in as the primary master, and it'll boot off the first drive in the system, which will be our USB drive. So let's just start the utility, David B's utility, and add in a virtual machine. So the name of the virtual machine is the name that's going to appear in the utility. It can be a different name from the one that you've got in VirtualBox. And as you can see there, you've got a QEMU choice as well. You can actually run QEMU instead of VirtualBox, but there's really no need. RMPrep USB will run QEMU. And you can just choose your USB drive from the drop-down list there. I've got a verbatim 16 gig USB drive. And now it appears as an item in the form. If you look at the options menu, there's an option to show a second USB drive there, so you can have two USB drives attached to the virtual machine. And we've got an option there to enable VT, which is virtual technology. That greatly speeds up the VirtualBox virtualization. So if your CPU is capable of it, then use that. And we'll just change the options here to have it on. It's quite handy to be able to turn that on and off, because if you boot to XP, it doesn't like it on, so it's best to turn it off for XP setup. But once you get to the second stage setup in XP, you can turn it on. And here we're just adding the second virtual machine in, which is the IDE one. Again, just choose our verbatim USB drive that I've got plugged in already, and might as well enable VT permanently on this particular setting. So now we should be good to go. Okay, so let's try the USB boot SATA entry. I'll try to boot off my USB pen. So there's the Oracle session, and it's booting off the pen. I've got easy to boot on this pen, so it's also got a script font, so it's rather difficult to read, but you can see that it's booted fine. Now when you go to close the virtual machine, make sure that you choose power off the machine. Very important. Don't use save the machine state, otherwise it'll just boot up with the same state that you left it in. You don't want that. You want to power off the machine, so make sure that item is selected. Let's try the second virtual machine. It's got to wait for the previous session to close. This is a bit of a nuisance, but it's very slow to close sometimes. If you get a failure on booting, then just quit everything and try again after about 30 seconds, and it should work. And there we go, it's booted again to a different virtual machine, but the same USB pen. And we can try and select a menu item in here just to make sure that it is working. Let's just choose the first stage of XP install, perhaps. Say this sometimes crashes if VT is enabled, but we won't get that far. In this case, I'll just make sure that we can boot off the ISO. And there we go, it's booted up to Windows Setup, straight off the ISO. And make sure that again you've got power off the machine. So just to demonstrate some troubleshooting, if we run the Oracle VirtualBox Manager, you see it might give us a warning about a virtual machine, a virtual disk here, the VMDK, which belongs to our USB drive, and it's saying it's inaccessible and we can't actually run the virtual machine. Now this happens sometimes, especially if you run the virtual machine too fast, one after the other. One way you can do to clear this is to just go to the Virtual Media Manager, select the USB virtual machines that all begin with VMUB, and release them, and then remove them. And just do the same for each one. And then when you rerun David B's utility, it'll remake those VMDK files, and you should be good to go. So there we've got the primary slave is the actual the virtual machine hard disk. And of course, if we try to boot off this now, it'll just try to boot off the empty disk, and it won't boot. But if we actually just quit that and just run the virtual machine, you'll see that it first of all waits for the current job, the service, to finish. This can take a while, and sometimes this fails. So if it does fail, don't worry, just wait about 20-30 seconds and try again. See, it's still trying, it's still waiting for it to finish. It should eventually finish, and when it does, you can just try again. So it didn't actually work that time. So another thing you can do, of course, is just try a different machine. Let's just close that. Maybe that'll help. You can see there's an option here to run faster, but you must close VB Manager first. So we could try ticking that, and then closing the VirtualBox Manager, and then try and run it now. It seems to be more reliable actually on that setting, less trouble. So it depends what suits your particular host system. And see, it's now run without a problem. So just find the setting that suits your system, and you shouldn't have a problem. Once it's set up and running reliably, it's extremely useful. It runs very fast, and you've got full read-write access to that USB drive under the VirtualBox machine, which is brilliant.
Drop off this waterfall, and I need you to rescue me.